I just want to turn it back from the 300,000 foot level, very low down. There's talk that Facebook is starting its own version of TikTok. Let's just, for the purposes of this discussion, assume that TikTok and the Chinese ownership of TikTok is off the table. Now we have the same app owned by an American company with all of the human rights and all of the data collection, economic security, national security, blackmail, all the other issues we raised. Adam, would you use an American version of TikTok? And would you let your kids use it? And I'll ask everybody else the same question.
Well, I'm not on Facebook, but that is primarily for privacy issues. But my children are on TikTok, and I don't really have a problem with them being on TikTok. So yes, my kids are on Instagram. It's the same thing, and I don't have a problem with them being on Instagram. So the version of TikTok is Instagram that exists right now. So I don't have a problem.
Cleet, how about if you have kids of that age, would you let them on TikTok?
They're not quite there yet, but they will be one day. I mean, look, I think the concerns is I articulated, Adam articulated, and Lindsay articulated. They're real concerns with TikTok, and a lot of it has to do with the linkages to the Chinese government as well as the opaqueness of the algorithms. And so I would be concerned about TikTok. I would not be concerned about a U.S. company that provided the same services. I think there is a clear distinction there.
Okay, Lindsay, would you let your kids on TikTok or an American version? Leaving TikTok aside, would you let them on a U.S. version of TikTok, a Facebook-owned version of TikTok, or whatever company?
I would. I probably wouldn't personally use it. I think there are, privacy concerns, but I think that some of the national security concerns would be alleviated by a wholly separate and U.S.-owned platform. I think there are certainly loopholes, especially in the way that U.S. companies secure information, sell it to data brokers. There are ways for the Chinese government, I think, to get a lot of this data. But I would at least take solace in the fact that the ultimate owner of the company was not on a mission to collect the world's data and use it to surveil, censor, and potentially jail parts of its population, or at least where it would be limited by U.S. law.
Okay, thank you. So back to a question on the legalities, and I think this is for both you, Adam, and Cleet. And correct us if we're wrong, we think that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act for this executive order, that this was the first time that this was used, but probably not for the last time. If we have a Biden administration, will it continue to issue this sort of executive order? And should, in other spheres of American life, there have been a lot of fights over, overuse of executive order. Should the administration be doing this? I understand this is considered a national emergency for now, but is this going to become a precedent, and should it become a precedent? Adam or Cleet, whichever one of you, or maybe both of you want to take that one.
Sure, I can go first. I mean, first on IEEPA, just to be clear, it's been utilized. It underlies a lot of our sanctions in the United States. So it's not unprecedented to use IEEPA. What is unprecedented is to use IEEPA against a digital application you have on your cell phone. Look, and I take your point about the EOs and sort of, I don't mean to be too pragmatic about it, but I feel like whoever's in power is going to use the authority they have, and whoever's out of power is going to complain about it. Kind of what we see happening on the Supreme Court right now. And, so I think you're going to continue to see it. I think the Biden administration, if there is a Biden administration, I do think that they would go down this path. My general view is that there might be a little more predictability in the way they roll things out, more of a thorough interagency process. Maybe less of it will play out in the press with different advisors with different views. But at the end of the day, my colleagues, I think, articulated better than I did the wide reason of wide rationale for this. And I don't think the U.S. government is going to sit on its hands, no matter who's president.
Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Cleet. I think the presidents are going to use executive orders. That's what helps them get things done quickly, and especially if they're facing a hostile Congress. And President Obama issued several executive orders to deal with cyber and digital issues. I guess in my mind, the fact that this was declared an international emergency, it does not seem to me to be, again, even if you accept that there is a security risk, national security risk, what was the emergency part of it? It had been existing for quite a while. So I suspect that, the process will differ as we move forward, but the tools will still be from the executive agency. And I think there'll be less of a convergence of economic security and national security, or at least, again, it'll go through a different process. So we'll have a different set of criteria in place.
Okay. Let me turn to a question from a journalist in the United Kingdom, Paul Dinsdale. How can the US and the EU reconcile their different approaches to data security, i.e. more emphasis on privacy in Europe and more on national security in the US? Will we need a change of president? I mean, how would you address that, Adam? Cleet was just very critical of Europe, essentially, for using privacy as a stalking horse to do industrial policy and to disadvantage U.S. tech companies. How would you speak to those issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, as Cleet expressed, there is a long-term concern that GDPR is often used, or other regulation is often used, for economic reasons. But I do think there is a growing demand in the United States for national privacy laws and national breach laws, and getting something closer to GDPR. And you can see that the shift in the attitude towards the tech firms, the platforms themselves, right? Especially after California passed its security law, they are concerned that the California law will become the standard, and so they want to help shape a national privacy law. So I think we are moving in that direction. There is, I think, pretty broad support. Look, we're seeing discussions about regulating the media platforms both from the left and from the right now for different reasons, but we're definitely talking about that. And so I think we will get there. I think there is, like I said, I think there is a move on both on the regulatory and the legislative front to create national laws in the U.S.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in on this for a second. I mean, for folks who aren't aware, I mean, Republicans in the Senate, Senator Wicker, they introduced a broad privacy bill just on Thursday. For some of the reasons Adam mentioned, really trying to, they anticipate that something like this could be coming, and really wanted to lay down a Republican marker on what it could look like. I think on the Dem side, I mean, there's a lot of positive talk about the CCPA in California. And I think, look, U.S. companies do recognize that privacy is really important to people, and I think are already taking steps in the United States to try to address that. But I will say, I mean, it seems you can sit here and think about it logically and say, Republicans really love privacy, Democrats love regulation. Why can't we just get this done? We've been having these conversations for about 15 years. I don't know. But I can say that there is at least some momentum on both sides. And I think the U.S. companies realize this is important for consumers and that they're moving in that direction as well. On Europe, I'll just say, look, the U.S. and the EU need to figure out how to reconcile their differences on this and on many other issues. Because, again, I think the threat that we pose to each other, or even if you want to call it a threat, the differences between us are maybe economic-based, maybe somewhat of sort of the way that we regulate privacy. But the threat that from China and from Russia, has been articulated today is a real national security threat, and we've got to figure out a way to work together. I do push back a little bit on the notion, though, that it's just, there's going to be a new administration and suddenly, it's going to be kumbaya between the U.S. and the EU. We have some real differences here, and Joe Biden is not going to be cool with regulations from Europe that discriminate against U.S. companies. He's just not. And so there's still going to be tension. I'm hopeful that whoever is president, whoever wins this election, we can work together better with Europe. Let's not brush aside some of the true differences here we have. Hopefully we can get past them and really focus on the common.
Okay.
Yeah, I would also add to that, sort of on the second half of that question, that I think an encouraging sign is we have seen Europe come a little bit closer to the U.S. position on China over the last really 6 months since the pandemic. There has been an awakening on the continent, and I think in the UK as well. It seems like a lot of the coronavirus mask diplomacy, wolf warrior diplomacy on Twitter has actually spectacularly backfired on China. They've somehow squandered this sort of leadership moment where the U.S. coronavirus response faltered. And so I think there is, in whatever window it may be, a real opportunity for the United States and the EU and the UK to work together on addressing the common threat from China. On the U.S. side, there are movements towards more data privacy frameworks, and calls from technology companies themselves. And in particular, I think there's also a greater awareness in the United States side on the threat of intellectual property theft, and perhaps a clear line to be drawn between the economic cost of that espionage and breach notification laws. There was a study done out of NPR and Frontline last year that basically found a tragedy of the commons problem in the United States response to Chinese-enabled cyber IP theft, in that companies weren't actually reporting it to the Department of Justice, who would then hold these companies, hold China or affiliated entities accountable, because it was a bad look to shareholders to say, "Hi, I've been hacked." And B, they're worried about business interests in China. So while I think that there are a number of provisions of GDPR that may not be directly applicable to the US context, and certainly they've struggled in Europe with enforcement. One in particular is the breach notification requirement, within 72 hours of learning of a breach. Not saying you have to necessarily go public with it, but at least report it to an authority. I think that would actually crack down on a lot of the theft that we've seen that are increasingly being released in these national security related indictments. So I think there's a convergence not only of the sense of the risks, but a sense of what's really at stake.
Adam, last words. Are we going to see legislation that actually could command some bipartisan support, do you think, in the next Congress?
I would never want to go on the limb about predicting what Congress is going to do, but I do think there is support for it. As Clete said, I think there are both Republican and Democratic efforts here, and I think that in some ways China might actually drive us to get our act in order, because we do have to bridge the gap with Europe and others to try to work together. And so to the extent that we can decide what it is we're doing at home, it makes it much easier than to turn around and try to shape what's happening abroad.
Okay, and last question for you, Adam, since if Biden were elected, what were the top 3 things that you would have him do right away?
Well, in this realm, I think 5G is the most important play long term. So both continuing the effort to convince allies not to use and spurring domestically innovation and growth. I think we need a greater pushback on the cyber hacking. So what the response is there, the sanctioning indictments don't seem to work. And then finally is what we've been talking about is a kind of domestic set of laws and regulations that deal with data privacy. So then we can then start shaping the international environment.